In the name of the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, welcome to the Feast of the Epiphany, which occurs once a year in the church calendar and is generally couched within the story of the three kings, or the three magi. I remember last night as it was celebrated in my country of origin, as a little boy, really looking forward to the night. Looking forward to that night more than Christmas night. See, Christmas night, I went to church at midnight. That's when La Misa de Gallo, the Mass of the Rooster, occurred. So there was a slight tension because, of course, Santa Claus was coming. And you wanted to be up and awake because you wanted to catch the little fat guy in the red suit drinking a Coke. Which, by the way, we did have that commercial, that sign in Cuba as I was growing up. Santa laughing with a Coke in his hand. But then at the same time, you had to stay up for that Mass, which at that time, prior to Vatican II, was in Latin. And I never understood what they said. So within that tension, we were obedient and we went and all that. But, Epiphany night, you didn't have to go anywhere. You went to sleep. Because the sooner you went to sleep, the sooner you woke up, and the sooner there were your gifts again. No adult got gifts that night. All the gifts were for the children. There weren't as many as Christmas, but it didn't matter because we were special that night. We were the ones getting the gifts. There were no adults to deal with. And I remember that. And that's one of those things that stayed with me it's been for a long, long time. As I grew up and began to study Scripture more and more, I look at the story of the three kings and I find some holes in it, which are disappointing. For one, they didn't make very wise decisions. Would you go to the Roman Tetrarch and ask, where is the king of the country that you have occupied? It doesn't work, right? I mean, it's going to tick off the Tetrarch, which he did. And his response was a very sad, awful response, and that was to kill all the male children 2 years of age or younger. And that's called Holy Innocents' Day, which we celebrate December the 29th. That was not a very good idea. Going to Herod to get directions, that was really not good. Regardless, they followed a star. They followed something in the sky that occurred that was strange to them. It was odd. They had not seen before. Now, whether you believe that they were astronomers or astrologists really doesn't matter, because they saw something. And perhaps it might have been the supermoon that we had on January the 1st this year. Or maybe it was the aligning of Mars and Jupiter that occurred this morning at 6:15 on the southeast quadrant of the sky, which of course for us was covered with clouds. We do not know what it was, but they followed it. And they followed that light as you and I follow that light this day. Isaiah writes, "Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you." What a great promise. What a great promise. The light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you, upon each one of us. And this is a promise that God made to the people of Israel. But it's also a promise that you and I can claim. Why? Why? Because part of the Epiphany feast is that people outside of the Hebrew nation came to meet the new king. The kings were from wherever they were. Arabia, Saba, wherever the psalmist tells us that they come from. And then, to undergird that a little bit stronger, Paul, in his letter today, talks about that anybody and everybody can come to Jesus Christ and be saved. And that is where you and I fit in. Where did you come from to reach where you are spiritually now? There was a journey. You were probably, because statistics show that very few Episcopalians were born into the Episcopal Church. Any cradle Episcopalians in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have over 90 people in here, 11, okay? So that tells you we've come from different ways and different journeys, and we come together to hear the same message, and that is that we are saved through Jesus Christ. He is the light. He has shone on us. And anytime we enter a dark time in our lives, God's light has come and shines our way out of that. To dispel darkness, that was an idea that God had at the beginning. And I shared these two pieces with you last Sunday, but I think it bears to say it again. In Genesis, we find that God says, not as we translate it, let there be light, but let light be born. Fiat lux, let light be born. Something that wasn't there now is. And then as we heard, Christmas Eve, and then on the Sunday after Christmas, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. In Him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. Now, brothers and sisters, today you have to arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. What a deal. God has come upon us as a community and individually. And I want to share with you two stories that I hope enlighten us into this. The first story has to do with John Morris, who built a home in Rutherford Town, North Carolina. This was in the 1770s. And he started a fire in his fireplace, and nobody knows why, but it became a major point of pride for the Morris family to not let the fire go out. Even when John built a new house for their expanding family, he took some of the fire, some of the embers, to start the fire in the new place. And they proudly declared that they would keep the fire going as long as they could to honor the wishes of John, who charged his family the fire must never be allowed to go out. So that fire became the catalyst to be passed in the family history, on and on and on and on. In the 1920s, his great-great-grandson, William Morris, had no children, never been married, and he was nearing 80. So he wanted to inspire his nieces and nephews to keep the fire going. But as it happens, they weren't very interested. Nancy and I became very disappointed the other day when we read an article that corroborated what our kids have said. They're really not interested in some of the things that we would like to leave behind for them, that we inherited, precious things, rare things. They're not electronic. They can't talk into it, nor text out of it. So an Iranian piece of tapestry that dates to the 1800s. So it was with William Morris's family. So he became very concerned, and he went to the local newspaper to see if there was any interest on the part of anybody to keep the fire going. And do you know what happens if you win the lottery? Number one, tell us. Call him. All right, and call him immediately. Everybody wants to be your friend. Everybody wants to be a family member. So what happened to Mr. Morris was that anybody with a Morris name called him to show interest. However, showing interest and being committed to keep the fire going were two totally different things, and nobody committed to keep the fire going except, wait for it, next door neighbor. Mr. Hemp Alexander Owen had only one thing to say to him on the day he knocked on the door. And he told William Morris, I've come to tell you that I'll keep the fire going. And much to Mr. Owen's delight, he said, why? I'm delighted. He says, I want to honor the legacy. I just admire what you and your family have done. Now, we do not know when Mr. Morris died, but when Hemp Alexander Owen died in 1948, his obituary stated that he was the keeper of what now is called the Saluda fire. The fire itself had been burning for 170 years. But that's the last record we have. We do not know if the fire went out. Is it still burning somewhere? We simply do not know. But we know where that fire comes from. We know where that fire comes from. And Father Keith was able to find it in perhaps a not that well-known Methodist church in Wiley, Texas. But it comes from Bethlehem, where our Lord was born. And that light has been lighted and burning for 2,000 years. And you have that light here. I have that light here. We have that light here as a community. Wars have been fought and are still being fought. Revolutions have turned history on its head. And secular philosophies have come and gone, and they've claimed their place in the sun or in other places. But the flame of Christ continues to shine through the darkness. Arise and shine, my brothers and sisters, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. This is our call as the body of Christ. But we're also called as individuals. We're to arise and shine, for your light has come. Catherine's light, Lee's light, John's light, every one of your light. God has given you that light. Second story. You probably do not know this person. Have no reason to, because it happened a long time ago. Name is Tony Melendez. And years ago, when Pope John Paul II came to the United States and went to the LA area to be in the Coliseum to preach and say and celebrate Mass, there was a young man that was called upon to play for the Pope. And see, he was a little bit different than others because he was limited by birth defects. He taught himself to play the guitar with his feet because his arms were not there. So he supported himself as a street musician. You've seen those if you've been to the right place at the right time. The musician with the hat on the side of a saxophone or guitar or drums or whatever, especially after Texas Ranger games. So there he is on the sidewalk in Los Angeles playing hymns for bystanders until someone comes and says, I got a place for you. And he goes and plays with the Pope. And one of the things that stood out that now we find to be out of the ordinary with Pope Francis breaking through lines and going to see people, that's what John Paul II did. He broke through the lines, broke through the protection and went and hugged this man. And this is what Tony Melendez says in his book, A Gift of Hope. After the concert, I walked backstage through the waiting crowd of old friends and new. At the back of the crowd, I saw a badly deformed young woman in a wheelchair. Her arms and legs were twisted, but she smiled and tried to wave as I passed by. I kept walking towards the exit, then I stopped, turned around and walked back in her direction. When she saw me standing beside her, her eyes filled with tears. She reached her hand out towards me and struggled to speak. "Tony," she said, "because of you, we all have hope." Wouldn't you like for your epitaph to be that? Because of you, we all have hope. See, that's the light we carry in us. It's the light of hope. And the followers of Christ, like you, have had that light shining for millions of hours, years, 4 decades, 4 centuries. So we ought to let our individual lights shine so that our neighbors can see us as beacons of hope in a world of darkness. And I do not see the world getting any lighter, but it will be if we choose to let our light shine. And I want to end with this, which occurred in World War II, when 500 GIs were in an Italian amphitheater listening to a version of Rigoletto, the opera, and in the middle of one of the songs, Air Raid comes on, and all the lights go out, and the music stops. And the GI directed his army-issued flashlight towards the stage. And then that was followed by another, and another, and another, and another, and enough light that the conductor bowed to the crowd and started up the music again. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the people, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. That is God's promise to us, and it must be our promise to the world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.